Hi, welcome to part two, nutrition for the developing body and brain in a child. And this time we're going to do childhood and adolescence. And this time, Dr. Erica Callahan, who also wrote the PowerPoint with me the last time, is able to join us. So I'm really excited to welcome her again as one of our most common guests that we have on these trainings. So how exciting there is that brain that we just know how important is it for kids and for all of us. So here we go. So Dr. Erica Callahan is got a master's in applied clinical nutrition, and she's a chiropractor, and she is the associate dean of the chiropractic program at Campbellsville University. She teaches my favorite thing, biochemistry and nutrition, and she also supervises nutrition research. I am a chiropractor, a master's in applied clinical nutrition, and I was the former dean of the Master's in Nutrition program, and I'm a professor emeritus at Northeast College of Health Sciences, and I just recently retired after 30 years. Dr. Callahan and I have done many research projects together, and we continue to love nutrition research. So without further ado, now we're going to actually talk about part two, where are we at? So when we're starting here, we're going to start at childhood, and Dr. Callahan is going to take over.
All right, sounds good. So we're going to kind of step through the macronutrients first. We're going to look at caloric intake, protein, carbohydrates, and healthy fats. And then kind of wrap up with a little bit of, well, what happens if they need a little extra support, if we're not quite getting, especially the micronutrients that are recommended during growth, right? Childhood and adolescence. And then we've got a couple little fun snippets about good movement. Dr. B is going to talk a little bit about good sleep and routine as well. So first, we're going to start with the macros. And the really important thing about feeding a child is that this is not the time to go extreme one way or the other. We don't want to limit a potential macro. This is not an appropriate age group or demographic for ketogenic type diets, low carb type diets. I mean, it's about the right macros, not limiting, and it's definitely about not too many. So we want to be able to balance the calorie intake, the carbohydrate intake, the protein, and the fat, especially as well, because kids need all of it for their developing muscles, for their developing nervous system and brain, for their hormones, for everything in between. And then particularly towards the end, we're going to talk about the bottom, like three mostly: vitamin D, probiotics, and magnesium. And just as a little snippet, like a sneak preview of where we're going, the easiest way to get magnesium into a little kid's diet is, I mean, what kid does not like chocolate? Very few do not like chocolate. And dark chocolate is one of the richest sources. So having a source of good quality cocoa and dark chocolate will be a really easy way to get magnesium in. And then there's different ways to supplement. If a child, like Dr. B talked about in part one, I'm sure, has had adverse childhood events, so they've had some struggles, they've had some home life occurrences or environmental occurrences that add up, right, to dysregulate the autonomic nervous system and cause some dysfunction, they are absolutely these type of kids that need a supplementation, like a good support. It's also critical for children that have a neurological diagnosis, you know, ADHD and hyper attentive disorders and things like that. But I mean, let's be honest, it is beneficial for every kid because even in, I mean, as a mom going through the summer right now, we are just constantly going. We're going to karate, and then we're going to the fair, and then we're going here. So 3 meals a day is sometimes difficult. So we want to give you recommendations that are as easy as possible to get the nutrients into your child that they need. So for this chart, these actually come from health.gov. So these are standard recommendations for kids. This is in particular school-age children, so up to like, you know, 4 to about 8 years old. If you look at the top, really the calories are not that much. A little one at 4 would need really only about 1,200 calories a day, and maybe a little bit more than that when they're double that, like up to age 8. When they're real little, like if they're age 2, 3, maybe even 4 or 5, depending on the size of the child, a serving is really just a tablespoon, so of their age. So like 3 tablespoons for a 3-year-old of carrots, that's a serving. So why I point that out to my patients a lot is because when we order things at a restaurant or we fill our child's plate up at dinner at night, that's a lot more than they probably need serving wise. In particular, Dr. Mary is going to talk about the protein intake. The general recommendation for young ones about 19-20 grams. And then carbohydrate intake is at 130, which is relatively low for an adult. And in parentheses, we have 175 next to it. And the reason why we have that is because that's how much your body needed when the mom was pregnant for the developing brain. So if mommy needed it, then probably a little one needed it too. And then it jumps radically to calorie intake when a child gets into middle school and high school, ages 9 to 18. I mean, look at that young man, 14 to 18. If you have or have experienced, know of a teenage boy, they eat the house, right? 3,000 calories a day. Now we're on the side of this is a lot of food. We want to make sure that what we're feeding them is not a hidden hunger, right? That the food is quality and of nutrient dense. And if they're having a hard time getting to the macronutrient recommendations, that we're supplementing them where they need to be supplemented.
So the first of the macronutrients that we're going to talk about is protein. And the reason that we do protein first is not really because it is the largest part of the caloric intake, that is carbohydrates, but because protein is necessary to make the axons in the brain, the connections, the wires. That is made almost all of protein, and then it is surrounded by these healthy fats. So this is why we're going to really lean on protein and fats for the structure of the brain, whereas we're going to talk about carbohydrates as the energy for the brain. So that's what we really want to focus on. And when we're saying that for most kids, that they need to have, we said, around the 19-20 grams until we get to be adolescent men, and those boys, they are going to need a lot. And that's why when sometimes they say, well, I had an egg for breakfast, maybe not so bad if you're trying to get to 20 and you're giving them 6 to 7 grams in an egg for your 4-year-old, but one egg is nothing to a teenage boy. That's like, they got to get to 50 something. And some teenage boys are the size of adults. And then we're at really like 1.2 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight, because they're really like the size of men. So this is where that teenage boy is really a bit of an outlier compared to what else we're talking about. If we focus on this slide primarily on those littler kids and how much do I really have to get in there, once I have something where we are getting at least a third to half of that protein once or twice a day, we're probably going to make it then, because as we know, those kids need the energy. They're going to be really driven to do the carbs. So we just have a lot of pictures of things. And the great thing is that nuts and seeds, sometimes they get vilified. We don't believe that at all. You really want to have those nuts and seeds. And if they're not lactose intolerant and they can do cow dairy, then there's really such good protein, 1 gram per ounce on average for that. And so we want to let them have those things in their diet. What happens though if you're really struggling? We know that half a packet is the RDA for kids of the breakfast blend. And so I'm just going to let Dr. Callahan talk about her kid's favorite recipe, and then I'm going to talk about my favorite thing that I like when I want to have something fun. So Dr. Callahan.
Yep. Yeah, the Callahan favorite recipe since the beginning has been frozen berries. Typically, you kind of get a mix of like blueberries and cherries or maybe raspberries. And that kind of cools the whole drink down as well too. Some almond milk typically will do unsweetened, the amount depending on how thick we want it, and a half a pack of the potential power. So a little while ago, my girls started doing smoothie bowls, and they would sprinkle granola or something on it. And if they wanted a smoothie bowl, they just, brought the almond milk or the milk down quite a bit. But yeah, that's by far our favorite.
And then I was talking to other people, my sister-in-law for one, and a student on a call once, and they were like, oh, you can make a pudding and you can get the probiotics. So we're going to talk later about probiotics. And so I realized this is delicious. You just put the packet right in the bowl, half a packet in the bowl, half a cup of filtered or spring water, half a cup of any yogurt, whisk it, and it is the most delicious chocolate pudding. And so at half a packet, that's going to be 12 grams of protein, well on the way for those kids. And Dr. Callahan, back onto the blood sugar.
Mhm.
I'm
So, are we
I'm
doing?
doing that, right.
Yeah, you're
Oh,
doing that
sorry.
one.
Yes, I'm like, which slide is this? So the ginger, turmeric, and cinnamon are really important to control blood sugar. So one of the things is that a lot of times everybody's like, well, what about the sugar? So I want to really talk about that right now. That when we have an inflammatory diet, when we eat a standard American diet that can be very inflammatory, that's really hard on the intestines. The ginger and the turmeric are going to totally cut that down. And that's going to allow you to digest and absorb your food better. That's going to mean that kids are going to behave better because their intestines are not upset. There is a thing called the gut-brain axis, and kids are very, very sensitive to that. You know that when sometimes they go to a party and they have like colors and cupcakes and all that, and then they run around like little banshees, and then they're throwing themselves on the ground and they're crying. So this is going to really help that, and eating healthier food. And then cinnamon is really important to control their blood sugar so they don't get either hyper or hypoglycemic. When people talk about carbs like they're bad, carbs are not bad. It's really that too much sugar is bad because it's going to dysregulate your body and be really tough on your nervous system and your blood vessels. So we don't want more than 10 grams of sugar per meal, but that means like added sugars, and we want to have the right carb fiber ratio. So we're going to talk about that. And we want to do the following. We want to take their age. So say their age is 3, then we're going to add plus 5. And so that would be 8 grams. And then when you get to be an adolescent, then you need an adult dose. On average, fruits or vegetables are 4 to 5 grams per cup. So one apple would be on average about 4, maybe 5. A banana, same thing. Not juice. No juice, because once we lose that fiber in the juice, it doesn't actually count. So we have to have whole fruits, and a fruit is anything that has a seed. So how do we have this right amount of fiber that we're going to support these very important probiotics that are going to do so much for the brain development and for bone development and for muscle development? Well, we want to learn to read a label. So we want to look at the total grams of carbohydrates. Here on the breakfast blend, it's 15. And we're going to divide that by the dietary fiber, and 15 divided by 4 is less than 10. That is good. If you're not great at math, you take the fiber, put a 0 after it, and the carbohydrates have to be less. So that makes it super easy to teach people how to do it. So this has 4, put a 0, that's 40. As long as the carbohydrates are less than 40, you're doing great. And the sugars have to be less than 10. We'd like a good carb fiber ratio greater than 2. So 15 divided by 4 is greater than 2. And so that is even better for you. But sometimes you'll see a label where maybe they only have 15 grams of carbs, but they only have 1 gram of fiber. That's 15 then. That does not meet the definition. And then that whole 15 grams is going to show up as sugar. And so people think they're not having sugar, but really they are. And that's a lot of things like a white bread or Italian bread, all the delicious breads, a lot of those. And some of the gluten-free things, unfortunately, have a very bad carb to fiber ratio. And that can lead to weight gain and obesity. So this is why we were really careful to put so much fiber. Most of the fiber in this is actually, all the fiber actually is coming from the peas and the cocoa. And so that's because there's only 9 ingredients. So that's really why this works out. And when you divide 15 by 4, you get 3.8, and anything over 2 looks great. So that's why we're just learning to read the labels. And that alone can help the kids to be better choosers. and they can look at things. And then unfortunately, what they'll do is then they'll hold you accountable when you go off the label. So just letting you know, that's how that's going to go. But it's really great to have little kid consumers like that. We want that fiber because healthy gut bacteria really helps many things. So when I have healthy gut bacteria, they're going to need food, and they get their food from fiber, and that's what's going to feed them. The healthy gut makes short chain fatty acids. That's going to make the intestinal cells, it's their preferred fuel. Now they're going to do their job. I'm going to digest and absorb, and so I'm going to have less indigestion. Lots of talk about biotin, but if I want to have really good hair, skin, and nails, I'm going to actually make biotin when I have good bacteria. And truthfully, biotin is necessary to metabolize all the macronutrients that's in all the biochemical pathways for proteins, for carbohydrates, and for fats. And so super important. And then there's all those people that'll come to you and talk about, oh, you need K2, oh, you need K2. It should be with your vitamin D, but truthfully, the vitamin K that the gut bacteria make is the right vitamin K. That is what you want, and that's going to make really healthy bones for those kids, for good blood clotting. Very, very important to have those good microbiome. And then there are the people who really love the keto. I want the sugar really, really low. That unfortunately is not going to let you feel satisfied, and not particularly great for kids, because we really want insulin, because when we bind insulin to the insulin receptor, which needs adequate glucose, not too high, not too low, not only does the glucose come in, but the amino acids come in. The amino acids are actually dependent on the insulin receptor. And so if I want to build muscle mass, I want protein to come into that neuron so I can build the wires to make connections so I can learn. So sleep, we're going to see, is important as well, because we always have construction at night. So we want to make those highways at night when there's not as much traffic. And so we need that sugar and that amino acids to both come in. So we have the energy and we have the building blocks, and we need insulin. So Dr. Callahan and I really not fans of any ketogenic diet for kids. That's just not really great for them, and their body knows how to digest and absorb cane sugar, because that's what's in beets, or that's what's in cane sugar. We know what to do. And so we're going to get better muscle mass, and we're going to get better connections in the brain.
So the last macronutrient we're going to talk about is fats. And in particular, we're going to focus a little bit more on the omega-6 fatty acid. In particular, I mean, you always think of it in kind of a pejorative term, that omega-6s are bad and omega-3s are good. But if you remember back to Dr. Balliette's biochemistry class, there are some very therapeutic and appropriate and really good omega-6s that are needed for the construction of our nervous system and our brain, especially the cell membranes. So yes, EPA and DHA, alpha-linolenic acid, absolutely important for sure. Those are ones that are typically supplemented in kids. We'll talk about that a little later, because not a lot of them are eating fish and shellfish consistently throughout the week. But things like some of your nut seeds and your nuts and seeds and like sunflower oil could be a lot easier to get in. So the one that we are really focused on for kids is lecithin. And fancy name, phosphatidylcholine, right? And it is a good source of our choline. It is part of the bilipid layer of our cell membrane, very highly found in our nervous system tissue in the brain. And it's a great source of choline. Now, there's two really great things about choline in kids and adults, right? Choline is necessary for that one carbon metabolism. So if you were not able to check out the chat that we did, there was a few docs of us on the methylation cycle, the MTHFR chat, myth and fact. I would definitely check that out on the YouTube page. But the methylfolate choline is going to be a nice bypass for people that have MTHFR SNPs, polymorphisms, deficiencies in that kind of B12 to folate side of the cycle, choline can kind of shoot that homocysteine right back up to methionine right in the middle of the pathway. So it bypasses the like suspicion or the risk or the caution that this child might have a genetic polymorphism and inability to really kind of use their folic acid and their methylfolate. So that's great, right? Easy to get in. It's already in the supplementation. It's easy in other food sources as well, too. In one of the other slides, we'll have other examples of choline. But choline makes us think of acetylcholine, right? And acetylcholine is the predominant neurotransmitter for good nervous system function on the postsynaptic cleft, right? And all of those signals are sent. That's motor coordination, that's learning, that is development. Anywhere between mind development and motor development is dependent on acetylcholine. We don't get it without choline. So those healthy fats, super, super important for protection of the nervous system and the neurotransmitters. So kids are in all shapes and sizes. I kind of had to chuckle under my breath when Dr. Belliat said, once you teach them how to read a food label, they're going to hold you accountable to it. Isn't that the truth? I mean, you know what I know, right? I know what I know. And I'm looking at labels and I'm buying snacks and my girls will catch me and say, Mom, this label doesn't add up. But I'm like, okay, all right, we're not going to pick that one. Take that one out of the cart. So it's hard, right? And some kids are not going to eat as well as other kids. So we have to have different types of kind of backup ways to get the nutrients into the kids for just no one is ideal. So some of empowering tips I like to kind of throw in kind of right in the middle is these are tips that help us as parents and as healthcare providers to empower the kids and empower families to make the best, healthiest choices. If you have to be on the run, if you have to run to practice, if you have a busy day, if you don't have time to cook, there's different ways that you can pack kind of nutrient dense snacks that we'll talk about. And I mean, I gotta say, the perfect thing really is a packet of protein powder, right? Being able to mix it, throw it in a shake, take it with you, because kids really regulate, and it has to do with blood sugar as well as it does with fueling the body. And they do it best when they're fed every few hours. They are very susceptible, especially little ones, when they're running around and metabolism is very high, to dropping into hypoglycemia, especially when their prior meal has been pretty low glycemic or high glycemic index foods, like real sugary stuff. So when you pick up your kids from school, hand them a good snack, hand them a protein shake, give them some water, right? They probably haven't eaten since 10 or 11 o'clock that morning when that's when they have lunch, right? In elementary school and in high school. Before they go to practice, make sure they have something to eat. You want to give them a choice. You want to change their choice architecture. So one of my favorite things about growing up with my kids growing up was giving them a snack basket. So I would put in a basket probably 4 or 5 different healthy choices. So it would be an apple or granola bar or a yogurt or whatever. And that basket was your choice for the day. So once that basket was gone, that your snacks were gone for the day. So it helped them to also pick what they wanted, really think about, this is all my choices. When it was gone, right? So do I really want it now, or can I wait an hour or two before I get that snack, or a half hour or whatever? And you want to give them choices. So the more that they are engaged with the decisions that you make for your family, the more that they're going to comply, for lack of a better term, with the healthy choices when they seem boring and not fair, right? So, and I'm sure Dr. Belliat experienced with her son growing up, we were not the fun moms, right? We like wouldn't let them have things. So
Yes, correct.
yes, correct. Yeah. So next slide.
But we have children, I'll throw that out. I think
Yeah.
I didn't think about it till this very moment, but when you let them make choices from healthy things, because you have
Yeah.
set up the snack basket or you've set up in the refrigerator. When he was a teenager, I literally had, I would make extra dinners and have covers on them so he could microwave them when he came home. So he'd like have dinner for breakfast and dinner for lunch and dinner for 3 o'clock and dinner for dinner. Like, but they were there and they were ready. And
Yeah.
that was really key. And then they just become not just better decision makers about food. I think they just become better decision makers because they have what's called agency and they feel a bit of in control of their environment. So I think we're really bizarrely with food doing a couple of things at the same time, which is really kind of cool, right? But I have 5 brothers, so I have a lot of experience in adolescent boys and the amount of food they can eat.
That's funny. So a couple of thoughts to add along with meals and shakes and things like that is, but calcium is a good, an important mineral for growth as well too. That can get in a lot of your dairy products and your plant-based products. You've probably heard Dr. Belliot talk before. Previously, we were looking at some research years and years ago about the activity of certain milk, sugars, and proteins on opioid receptors, proteins actually on opioid receptors in the brain. And I will never to this day, years ago, remember her going, that's why we all say cheese, right? Because it hits an opioid receptor. So good sources of choline, nuts, chocolate, eggs, things like that. That's a way you can also support that growing acetylcholine and brain development. There's the nuts and seeds are also a good source of magnesium and fiber and vitamin E. That can also help with the regulation of our dopamine and serotonin, GABA, very calming neurotransmitter. And then all of our fruits and vegetables, especially the bright colored ones, the yellowy ones, are going to give us vitamin C. We're going to need the hydroxylate, all of those amino acids to throw them into collagen as those little ones grow their ligaments and tissues and stuff like that. So as much of the colors of the rainbow and as much as the macronutrients as possible that you want to aim for your kiddos. So you might want to consider supplementing a couple of these. And this is kind of just like the Dr. Callahan opinion thought. There might be, in particular, obviously patient dependent. Little ones might need this rather than that in certain circumstances or conditions. But these are kind of my top like 3 go-tos that almost all little ones I would supplement in addition to all those macros. So one is vitamin D. Vitamin D, if your little one is not out in the sun, so especially in the winter, you might want to think of a supplementation up to about 1,000 international units. Depends on the age. If they're little, 1,000 is plenty. As they get a little older, and even into the teenage years, they're going to be an adult size, then that winter supplementation could go up to about 2,000. Maybe a little bit higher depending on their activity level during the winter or the summer. If they're out in the summer, they've got their arms and legs exposed. Now that I'm down in the South, I'm outside a lot more for a lot longer in the day, making lots of vitamin D, and that'll carry us longer in the winter months as well too. Followed up right next to vitamin D is DHA. And that is out of the omega-3s, we want a really good DHA. We typically get that in food sources from fish. And like tuna oil is very high in DHA. And again, not a lot of kids are eating consistent amount of fish and shellfish. So a DHA supplementation up to about 1 gram is not a bad idea. Not only is it imperative for the bilipid layer, for cell membrane maintenance and nervous system development, but it also is going to be the direct precursor to our anti-inflammatory chemicals called resolvins. So if the little one is tending to, go to birthday parties and eat a lot of junk and colors and like Dr. B said, colors and sugar and all kinds of crazy stuff, to have something to kind of resolve that inflammation that's going to result from them just being kids, jumping around, bouncing, hurting themselves. You don't make resolvin without DHA, and resolvin is a selective response mediator kind of thing where it's does exactly what it says. It resolves your inflammation. So if you don't have it, your inflammation continues and sometimes inappropriately. Last one is probiotics. Probiotics, I have, the longer that I've kind of delved into kind of nutrition research and just my own research and looking at things and learning more and more every day, I am a huge fan of getting it in a food form. So when you look at the literature, there are specific bacterial strains, lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, lactobacillus being more in the upper GI tract, bifidobacterium being more in the lower GI tract. And they have a lot of good research behind them, particular strains, particular types for different disease states or dysfunctions or support of this or that. And sometimes it's hard to pinpoint exactly what a person needs, right? A little kid or an adult, like, do you need this more than that, this strain? And it can get confusing for you and for the patient. So it is always good to push them, or not push them, but recommend them to go towards a food-based probiotics in the form of yogurt or kimchi or kombucha. Kefir is another one as well too, kind of just like a fermented yogurt, has a little bit more of a sour taste to it. And of course, any and all of these could potentially have a different taste. So again, it's just kind of slowly introducing kids to these tastes, to these textures, to these different health benefits. I mean, it took a little bit, but I've nailed down a really good kombucha recipe that my girls really love. So we drink it a lot throughout the week, and I don't even buy probiotics anymore. That's how we get our probiotics, is we grow it and then we drink it. So
Yeah,
for everyone.
yeah, I'll throw that in. When we were talking about this presentation, Dr. Callahan and I were really both big taking probiotics, and it's interesting. We read a lot of literature. We work with journals all the time, and it turns out that everyone doesn't need the exact same probiotic. And when you get it in a variety of foods, that just seems to work better. And same thing for me. I no longer take a probiotic at all, but I I mix the shake actually a few times a week and with the yogurt. And so that really works well. And because I'm allergic to cow dairy, I do it in coconut yogurt. So it just really works out. You can do it in any kind of yogurt you want because it just has a lot of bacteria, and then it's coming with the food that it likes. And so I think that's also what's helpful. And you're having it probably in the form your body wants it. So it's interesting. We both got there. We talked about that just the other day, how we've both gone to food for this. So we'll throw that out. One less thing, one less pill to take. So that moves us on to sleep, and found this adorable picture of sleeping, and it's underrated today. I think people in this fast-paced world, oh, let me get one more thing done. Oh, isn't it great? This person only needs 4 hours of sleep a day. That's just not the literature for the majority of us, and kids need even more. So having adequate restful sleep, really, really important, because just like when you're on the highway, there isn't construction in the day. There is sometimes, but most of the big heavy stuff happens at night, and that's also true. So we're building that internet in our brain, especially overnight. And we really have to get enough sleep so that we have this interesting thing that happens for adults at hour 7 to 8, probably at hour 8 to 9 or 9 to 10 on little kids, where all of a sudden, all of this calcium is going to come in, and that's going to tell the next cell to actually do their job better. And it's going to facilitate a pathway of learning and motor skills. And so we really want that. And so infants really need a lot of sleep. And so they're sleeping way more than half the day on average. And then same with the little kids up to 2. And then it goes down, but teenagers still need a lot of sleep. And when they have a lot of homework, and now they're going to bed at 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night, and then they have to get up for an 8 o'clock class, now we're really having issues. And so in Ithaca, where Dr. James Moss was the leading expert in sleep, they knew the literature, and the little kids who like to go to bed early and get up early, they get on the early bus, and the teenagers get on the later bus. So the teenagers, bizarrely, in Ithaca start later and go later, because that is better for their sleep hygiene. And little kids like to go to bed early and get up early, and so they can get their 9 to 12 in. And the older kids can then stay up a little later, get their homework done, sleep till 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, and then still get on the bus. So we just really have to be more conscious of that. And I don't think that every school district is reading the sleep literature and deciding when children should get on the bus. But here they do that. And I think it's made a big difference because teenagers are cranky enough, and lack of sleep and teenagers a big problem. So here is the real number of hours. So this idea, sleep's not important, not really good. What's the biggest thing that impacts sleep, unfortunately, is screen time. If they're on their screens right before they're going to bed, that's going to deplete their melatonin and ruin their good night's sleep. So sadly, especially those teenagers, you're going to have those parental controls and shut those phones off. Because if they're, they're texting their friends at 1 o'clock in the morning, not good at all for them. And that's probably why we're seeing so much depression and anxiety, and a lot of parents now having parental controls on those phones because that screen time is really making an impact on mood disorders, because we cannot repair those highways without it. I know that there's plenty of toddlers and little kids who are in front of an iPad as their babysitter, and it's not a judgment thing, it's just not a good neurological thing. That's really having an impact we don't understand well. These are the screen time recommendations. This is really from the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. They're really looking at this because mood disorders is rampant now in kids. That never ever happened before. There's a direct correlation. How we're going to get that done, that's going to be tough, because they're using screens at school. This is screen time of what is called basically recreational screen time. So this is, I'm just looking at my phone, or I'm just on my iPad, or I'm playing a video game. So you can see that nobody's supposed to be having more than 4 hours of that a day. And I think we've all known at least teenage boys that could be playing video games with each other for hours and hours and hours on end, and teenage girls that are on their phone way more than 2 hours a day recreationally. So this is something we're going to have to try to figure out, because sleep critically important for brain development and critically important for psychomotor skills. So you want to learn to ride a bike, you want to dance, you want to play soccer, you actually have to sleep. And so we're back now to what else do I need to sleep?
That else, that's right. Well, I think probably there's a couple of things highlighted on the slide, and I'm going to start with magnesium because that's usually my go-to when a parent or even, an adult for themselves will say that I have a hard time, especially falling asleep. I think about magnesium. We know that it's important for hundreds of different enzymes within our body, all those kinase enzymes, right? But it also is very highly needed for our neurohormone support. So that's our serotonin to melatonin, our dopamine, all the things that not only dictate our mood, but also dictate our sleep and our rest, our ability to kind of rest. So magnesium, definitely something to think about. The nice thing is that there is magnesium within the shake for sure. And it's a pretty good amount, especially for a little one. And you might have to, if you have one that's really struggling with sleep, maybe supplement a little bit more, maybe supplement with about 100 milligrams more. They come in droppers, they come in gummies. It's easy to get magnesium in if they're kind of not with the dark chocolate, nuts and seeds kind of recommendation, or green leafy vegetables. So, but in order to take or to make your serotonin and your dopamine and your melatonin, you need the protein first, right? You need the amino acid precursors to be able to go down that pathway. So you need adequate protein, going back to having that, if it's a little one, about 20 grams, if it's an older one, 50, 60, 70 grams at least, depending on their need and their activity level, especially as they get into sports and they move around. Those processes don't happen without your Bs either. So the methylation pathway of your B9 and your B6 and your choline and your B12, those are all going to be really important to get us to the neurohormones and the transmitters we need for calm and for rest. Again, if you can find, here it is, a supplement that's like a one-stop shop and it's easy to take, I mean, that could be phenomenally helpful for little ones because the more you push at them, the more they push back sometimes. I don't know, maybe I'm the only mom that has a mom that a kid is a kid like that, but you want to find something that's easy, that's doable and enjoyable and has it all. So these are the top ones for sleep, including magnesium. Movement's also important, just like having a sleep recommendation. The link there, if you want to visit it later, is the CDC guidelines for physical activity.
I'll hit it now for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Really important for motor and neural development. When you look at this, it actually gives, I like it, the updated recommendations for kids, either younger or up to adolescent. They now break it down to physical activity per aerobic, muscle strengthening, and bone strengthening. So they're starting to think about the different parameters in which we strengthen our body, cardiovascular wise, and then muscular wise, so things like climbing or push-ups, but then also a little bit of bone strengthening, like jumping or running, and something where, remember back to school, Wolff's Law, right? You put pressure on a bone, it's going to build. So that's why we want weight bearing and bone strengthening exercises. So at minimum, most children, when we're talking about little ones to adolescents, need about 60 minutes a day, 3 days a week of just aerobic activity, with a sprinkle of a couple times a week those other muscle and bone strengthening exercises. That's also going to develop their nervous system. And this is later on in adulthood, this study was done, but they did show that the stronger an adult's leg muscles were, the less risk they had of cognitive decline. And they were thinking that it had to do with vascularization and just metabolic efficiency. And even if it was just vascularization and lymphatic flow, you were getting nutrients to your brain the stronger your lower limbs were, which are the strongest muscles really in your body, as your glutes and your quads and things like that. So starting the kids on that type of habit and desire to move around is only going to promote their cognitive flexibility and their cognitive growth.
And so we're gonna end here, and just for our audience who's not here, we want to remind you that you can email questions to either me at mbelliette@potentialpowernutrition.com or Dr. Callahan at ecallahan@campbellsville.edu. And then I want everyone to also see this link. This is our YouTube channel. And on the YouTube channel, what we have now is it very well organized. There I am at Cornell looking over the hills in Ithaca. And so this is all the nutrition facts in the breakfast blend. And then these are all the videos that we've done that are available that you really can send to your friends, to your patients, to your family. And then these are a little bit more intense, but there is no quiz. We recommend that you watch them sometime. And then this is our section for parents and kids. And this is where this will be videotaped. So we have part one. This is another one Dr. Erica and I did before. It's only 30 minutes and we'll put them on here. So I'm going to stop sharing now and then I'll take questions from the studio audience.